to start.
If we are ready, we can start.
Yeah, okay, can we start? Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to inform our session, the opening of the session, business and economic session. Today we'll have 4 presenters. Each of the presenter will present their papers, and they have at least 10 minutes and 5 minutes for discussion. And the first presentation will be by Mammadov and Asadov, the effects of COVID-19 on small business in Azerbaijan. Please, your floor, please, you can present. Can you hear us? Yes? Can you check, Mehmet, Mr. Mehmet, what is happening? Why we don't have connection?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we have you here. Please, welcome.
Okay.
Welcome.
Please confirm if you see my screen.
Yeah, we see.
We see it.
Yes, yes.
Perfect. Okay, one more time, hello everyone. My name is Elman, and I am presenting today from Czech Republic. My presentation will be based on the survey that has been conducted by Mr. Ilgar Asadov in Azerbaijan. And the name of the presentation is The Effects of COVID-19 to Private Businesses in Azerbaijan. I added my and his picture for the further information. Let me move to the next one. The target group, I will try to see if I can move this. Yes, okay, it's better now. The target group of the project, basically the survey has been conducted by among 68 companies in Azerbaijan, and in total of 4,547 people are employed in these companies. We divided it into region-wise. The Absheron Peninsula, where Baku and my hometown Sumgait is located, where the capital is, 13% of the respondents. Gabala, it's a northern former capital, 8%. Ganja, 35%, which is in the western capital, used to be in the history. Lankaran, it is a port city in southeast, and the other regions, 32%. I will have to move this. Yeah, okay. So basically, what type of businesses they were from? 20% of the companies were manufacturing, 18% to educational, 18% one food industry, 7.2 were agricultural, 21.9 services and tourism, and 14.5% were catering industry. Next are the sizes of the businesses. 38% were micro businesses, 40 small, 16% were the medium businesses, and 5.5 were big industries. I will try to move it totally. All right. The next one, the changes due to COVID. Of course, it was expected that the changes were going to happen. Basically, 63% of the companies canceled all of their events due to government restrictions. 59.6% that they had to sanitize due to these restrictions and precaution reasons. 45%, 45.6% eventually they stopped the production, which means they ran out of business. Again, the same percentage, 45.6%, they reduced the working hours. And then 33.3% moved to online regime, continuing their business as a home office. Next were changes on educational system. 24.6% became fully online, 35% were partially, and 17% proceeded as normal. The action plans taken during the pandemics, only 19.3% of the companies made some sort of changes to their training programs, which is a very low number. And out of those, 49% became fully online, 12% partially, and 22% proceeded as normal. The effects on employees, 38% of the respondents mentioned that they didn't face any difficulties. 21% complained about infrastructural difficulties, like they didn't have reach to informational technology. 21% mentioned non-existence of training programs, and 15.8% faced problems due to lack of knowledge with technology. It is not surprising that some people were not able to use technology, or let's say the computers or stuff. And the same about their practical knowledge when it comes to those. 8% graded training programs highly, and 7% they say they had enough knowledge to work online. Again, very low number, only 7%. What were the gains? Not to forget that everything and these kind of big events, they also have like a positive sides. Well, to my surprise, 61% they said that no changes occurred. 21% they said everything went online. 19.3% said everything has changed, obviously. And then the other, let's say, the big impact point, 91% of the respondents are seeking for the help of government and their employers. The problems, open door events, like I mentioned in the few slides earlier, that these are the events that people are visiting the businesses. These were canceled due to restrictions. Roundtable discussions, again, due to that, this COVID pandemics, these events were also called off, and it was not possible to do it. Lack of technology, internet, and skills using technology. These were one of the biggest problems during the COVID-19. And lack of internship for vocational school students. These students are getting educated on field jobs, more like plumber. Some of them might be doing something with the furniture. They were not able to work in the companies who are producing this stuff, or they were not able to visit at all. Everything was online. So this is a big problem for them. And then next and the last one are the expectations. This, as we already heard, this project brought into a light certain main problems that were occurring in Azerbaijan. A necessity of an online educational system as an alternative to, let's say, classic style education. This became already a thing that they should be working on this one. Creating strong informational technology systems, computerized, let's say, the offices and certain, let's say, jobs should be done online, and this became a must now. And also the next one, educating their employees how to use computers, how to use informational technology, and so on. And then what would be the benefit? The computerized system will ease their job to monitor it, to increase the performances, and also the quality of the job. With this one, I am finishing my presentation and stopping sharing. If you have any questions, please feel free.
Yes, thank you very much. Please, questions to Mr. Mammadov. Please, do you have any questions? I have, not just because we are waiting another questions, I have two questions. The first question is concerning, you spoke about changes to COVID-19 in different companies. And how can you estimate what were the losses for big companies comparison to small companies, just to share? Because you spoke that there were about 5% of big companies were used in this survey. And what were the results of your assessment? What losses did they have? I mean, big business or only small business?
Okay, let me find a slide to be able to. All right. Yes, only the 5% were the big companies. Well, it's obvious that when it comes to bigger companies, they have more resources. For example, I had certain people that I knew, they managed to keep their jobs as the company went let's say, how they call it. I'm trying to figure out the word. They went to like shifts. Some people were going on based on a shifts, and some people were not going. However, when you compare it to the small company, as one of the slides showed, that as big amount of them, they ran out of business because they were small, their resources are not much. So it was obvious that a lot of businesses, for example, I had a friend who had the educational business. It was impossible to do for her online because these kids were very small. So they had to run out of business. However, when it comes to factories, well, they kept some of their employees. They laid off some, but they kept some. Or like another big business is the construction, like everywhere. Construction, of course, they had to stop the construction. However, if I compare it to Czech Republic, construction was going on. So I guess it is based on how they manage their stuff. My friend works for construction. He's an architect. He was going to job, but I believe when it comes to field jobs, it had to go down. So
yes,
I hope I could answer.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just small question concerning this survey. Who defined these questions for survey?
It was conducted solely by Mr. Ilgar Asadov. Due to language, let's say, skills, he doesn't understand English. So I was basically taking his work and translating it and preparing it to present it. Yeah, due to language, he couldn't be here today. It's his job and he has done it. And then let's say created this project in Azeri and presented to the locals, and I'm doing it for, let's say, international.
And are you going to publish the paper on your work?
I will have to discuss it with him and Mr. Selim. So.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please, questions. We have at least several minutes and questions. Please. Would you like to ask any questions? If you do not have questions, thank you very much, because it was very fruitful and interesting and very full presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The next presenter is Mrs. Schabasser, Digital Local Transparent, 6 Truths of Supply Chains After COVID-19. Please, the floor is yours. Christina.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, wonderful. Yes.
And I hope you can see my slides. Yeah?
Not
Do you
yet.
see it?
No, not yet.
Now?
No, Mr. Yes, okay, fine. We see.
Yeah?
Yes,
you see it and you hear me. Okay, thank you. So hello and welcome everybody to my presentation. My name is Christina and my topic is called Digital Local Transparent, 6 Truths of Supply Chains after COVID-19. So let's start with a brief overview of today's supply chains. They are stimulated by the idea of cost optimization, cost cutting, and just-in-time production. There often tends to be very little inventory in the systems that could compensate any interruptions. And I think it's not a secret that today's modern supply chains are very complex. And on the right-hand side, you see a structure of a modern supply chain. The nodes are the organizational units of the supply chains, and the arcs are the physical flow of materials. And what you see here, it's very interwoven, it's very complex in nature. And the problem here is that there's a problem of this complexity, because complexity, the more complex the supply chain, the more vulnerable it is to disruption risk, for instance. Yeah, and the COVID-19 pandemic has raised serious questions about the resilience of global supply chains. And many firms have struggled to cope with all the problems caused by the crisis. For instance, longer lead times, or also shortages of critical materials and products and so on. But let me allow a critical note here. What you see here in this figure is that there has been an enormous increase in natural as well as man-made disasters over the last decades. Man-made disasters is, for instance, terrorism. And I think this development should have been reason enough to rethink global supply chains, but nothing happened. And I think supply chains became more and more complex over the last decades. So it's not only COVID-19. Yeah, there were also disasters before. And now I want to show you 6 levers that could be moved. They offer a room for restructuring and rethinking supply chains, just to make them more resilient in the future. And I gained these ideas by studying literature, by studying economic newspapers and online reports on the effect of COVID-19 on supply chains. And I also interviewed experts in the field of supply chain management or supply chain associations, just to make sure, are these really these levers that could help if we move them, or we think about them, could there be a change in the future? Yeah, and let's talk about each of these levers. Complexity, the most important thing here is just to be aware of the main complexity drivers of supply chain. I mean, this is the characteristics that make supply chains more and more complex. It could be, for instance, the diversity of products and processes in the supply chain. And we should also note that there is the static and dynamic complexity, for instance, that arises from the environment. And here the first step is awareness would be a first step towards change. So you have to be aware of all these complexity drivers. The second one is redundancy. It's also a source of resilience. And what I think here is resources should be kept in reserve just to protect us in the worst case scenario. And redundancy can be achieved by multiple sourcing through supplier diversification. So if one supplier fails, another one can jump in and solve the problem, or also by safety stocks. Maybe there will be a reorientation from just in time to just in case. This means higher inventory is not longer seen as a sign of waste, but a sign of, okay, something good, something that can protect us if we have disruptions, for instance. And flexibility, there are 5 elements that give room for flexibility. Let me just mention one. If we take the element distribution, we could say, okay, we could make a prioritization plan that with rules that help us in the worst case to say, okay, these things are more important than the others. So it starts with just such simple things, but that could help a lot in the worst case. And IT and digitization, I think, yeah, it's without IT and digitization, the complex supply chain of today would not be manageable. But we also see, for instance, artificial intelligence works very well under normal circumstances, but in COVID-19 times, experts had to intervene in this very complex digitization processes just to make sure that things work again. So maybe we also should be aware about the limits of IT and maybe the role of experts. We have to rethink it. Maybe this will be more important in the future. Another lever of towards more resilient supply chains will be regionalism. So globalization versus regionalism. If we make this step towards more regionalism, we should also be aware of the very negative effects, or that we lose the very important advantages of globalization. This is the enormous growth rates, or maybe that we also offer opportunities for less qualified workers, for instance. So it also has downsides, all this. And another level is product variety. We all know that, okay, the heterogeneous consumer needs, and we all need product variety, and product variety increases worldwide, but it also has costs, and we see it during the pandemic and also in the decades before when there were disruptions, because, for instance, the average lead times are higher when we have more product variety. And last but not least, the study is ongoing, but I want to say what experts say so far to this topic, because I interviewed them to these 6 layers, what they think about them. A lot of what happens or will happen is not necessarily a consequence of COVID-19. For instance, take the automotive supply chain. There is a big restructuring process, but this has to do with the orientation, with the development of e-cars. So this is another cause here. This is not the consequence of COVID-19. And in the end, they say there won't be so much change in the end. Maybe some changes in some industries, for instance, in the pharmaceutical industry. And they also think that the dependence on China we have to rethink it. There will be a reorientation, and dependencies could arise due to digitization. This means as a fear of being too dependent, critical processes are not digitized to that extent that would actually be possible. So this is also the downside of digitization, because they say there could be there could be monopoly of the big players that have all the energy and the software that makes everything happen. But if there are some disruptions, okay, what will we do? So as a consequence, we do not make us so dependent on these companies or on these big players. And this is, yeah, we do not use the digitization at that extent that would actually be possible. This is the consequence. So this is a short summary of my study, and it's ongoing, but it's very exciting. Enjoyed it, yeah. Thank you. Do you have questions or something? Oh, I cannot hear you now.
I'm sorry. I have a question concerning the global value chain of supply chain, and how can you define the situation with this global value-added chain concerning this distribution, the role between China and other players in global market? Your opinion, because in your slides, the last slide, you wrote about the role of China.
You mean that the role of the global supply chain?
Yes.
I think supply chains around the world are struggling because of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think each global supply chain have to rethink their processes now. We have so many. The problem is that companies involved in the supply chain, they all have some responsibilities in terms of their core competences. So I think it will be very different to rethink the roles because they are specialized, yeah, in some subject, or they are specialized maybe in making good furniture, yeah, for instance, yeah. But this is a problem now because of the orientation towards the core competences, and we have this problem around the world. So I think maybe the hope is that some rethinking takes place. This is my hope. But as we know, it took years to come to this development to the global supply chain. So it will take decades just to make another development, I think. But I hope something will happen.
Yes, thank you so much. And just yesterday it was very interesting presentation about artificial intelligence. And what's your opinion because of digitalization? What will be the role in this supply chain of artificial intelligence?
It's a good thing, artificial intelligence, because it facilitates processes. But I think we should also see the limitations, and we should see that people are people, and we need experts, yeah, because if there are crises, okay, and we see IT does not work, then we do not have somebody who can solve the problem. So I think the role of experts will become even more important in the future.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Please, any questions? Do you have any questions, colleagues? Elman, do you have any question?
No, I don't. No, I don't.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So thank you very much for brilliant presentation, Christina. It was very, very interesting, yes. And the next presenter is Alechenu. And the topic is economic impact of diaspora remittance in Nigeria economy. Please, your floor. Do we have the presenter? Alechenu, do we have the presenter today? Please let me know, do we have Alechenu? If we do not have Alechenu, maybe he will be later. The next presentation will be my topic. My name is Olga Nosova, and I will present my paper, Employment Reduction as Effect of Consumer Debt Growth in the COVID-19 pandemic. Oh, is it the presentation of Alechenu? Don't you know? Okay.
Yeah, that's him. I think he's just on mute. I don't know if he's if he can.
Let's wait. Okay, let's wait him. Okay. Let's wait him. Please, the topic economic impact of diaspora
Can you hear me now?
economy. Please.
He is here, yeah.
Yeah, your floor.
Excuse me. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we don't hear you, please.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's good. That's correct. So can you see my slide?
Yes, we can. Please continue.
Okay, fine. That's very good. My name is Benedict Ebenezer Alechenu. My topic today is on the economic impact of diaspora remittance on Nigerian economy. That is my topic. I am an economic researcher from the Technical University, which is in Slovak, but I'm currently in Vienna. So let's proceed to, okay, wait, let me take it to this mode.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Okay, is it, I want to take it to the presentation mode. Is it on presentation mode now? Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
Okay, fine. That's very good. Okay, so as I said, so I will proceed with the introduction.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, so I proceed with the introduction. So the meaning of actually the remittance is viewed as the money sent back home by usually foreign workers who actually live in a different country. And they usually send this type of money back home to their relatives at home. So that is why, that is the meaning of remittance. So it's a remittance is a payment of money that is transferred to another party. Broadly speaking, nowadays, it is a payment. It is a payment which is being described as money sent home by a worker or a citizen who lives in a different country. And this money is usually sent back home to their relatives for their upkeep. So that is the meaning of the diaspora remittance. So diaspora remittance is generally meant to be money sent to another party, usually one in a different country. The sender is typically a worker, and the recipient is a relative at home or friends. So, an overview of the importance of remittance on Nigerian economy. So, the purpose of this paper actually is to assess the impact of the diaspora remittance on the Nigerian economy. And so, in 2018, the remittance from inflows to Nigeria stood at 24.3 billion, which represents a huge amount of money in terms of the GDP. It represents about 6.1 billion, 6.1% of the GDP of the country. And it is even more than 11 times the FDI inflows to the country in 2018. The remittance is the fastest growing source of foreign earnings in Nigeria today. As a result of this importance, the federal government made the CBN through the federal government, the CBN, made a policy in 2018 that any remittance that is being sent to the country, each $1, the federal government is going to give you 1 naira. The naira is the Nigerian currency. So that is what it is being here, that the Central Bank of Nigeria introduced an incentive or a rebate of 5 for each $1 of fund remitted to Nigeria through international monetary transfer. The remittances is also a money is made up of the largest, second largest source of income after the crude, because Nigeria is a mono economy. So the highest sources of foreign exchange earning is the crude. So the second largest is the diaspora remittance. Then according to the CBN governor, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, the reforms were meant to cushion the effect of the COVID-19 and the fall of the crude. So in 2019, the remittance to Nigeria stood at about 24 billion, which is huge amount of money when you compare the GDP and even the national budget of the country. Then the background of the study. What is exactly the remittance and how does it come into play? Diaspora or migrant remittance has been in existence in the world for decades. It is as old as globalization and it has been modernized since the 21st century. Since the 21st century, it has been modernized in a way that money transferred back home this time around can be accounted for. But in olden days, or before the 21st century, it was not possible. Then remittance is a non-commercial transfer of money by a foreign worker or a member of a diaspora community or a citizen with a family ties abroad, a household income in home country or homeland. Then we go to the world's remittance statistics. So according to the World Bank in 2018, overall global remittance grew by 10%, which stood at 689 billion. With the developing countries receiving almost 77%, which total about 528 billion. So China, India, Mexico, Philippines, and Egypt in 2018 are the top 5 recipients of the diaspora remittance in the world, which stood at 33% of the total remittance of the world GDP. According to the World Bank reports in April 2020, global remittance declined sharply because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the shutdown of the economy. And it is the sharpest decline in history, largely due to a fall in the wages and employment of migrants. So the migrant workers are the ones that loses their job opportunity easily in terms of this COVID-19 or any other natural disasters. Then the World Bank's release also stated that Nigeria accounts for almost 40% of the remittance flow into sub-Saharan Africa. Though in 2020, Nigeria's remittance stood at 17.2 billion out of the 44 billion sent to the sub-Saharan Africa. This is pretty much understood because of the high number of Nigerians in diaspora, partly because of their huge population. Nigeria is over 200 million. Then methodology applied. We use secondary data to conduct this research. And the table here shows the personal remittance received current between 2014 and 2020. And the top 5 countries were Egypt, China, India, Mexico, and Philippines. So, and on the table here, we can see that the sub-Saharan African country in 2020 received 44 billion, out of which I said Nigeria received account for about 17.2 billion in total. And then world remittance stood at, in 2018, of course there was a decline, and it stood at $7.2 billion. Then Table 2, the remittance received as a percentage of the GDP. Of course, the amount received by India, China are huge, but when it goes to the GDP per each of their GDP, country GDP, you discover that the Philippines has the highest, which is 9.3 billion. Then followed by Egypt, which of course stood at 8.84 billion. Then followed, of course, by Nigeria, which stood at 5.3 billion in 2018. Then the personal remittance received current in USD selected by the African countries in the sub-Saharan Africa. In 2020, the countries selected were Nigeria, Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, Senegal, Zimbabwe, and Uganda. So the top recipients was Nigeria, which stood at about 17.2 billion, followed by the Ethiopia and Ghana. So the least among the selected country is Mali, which stood at 1 billion. So we use graph to analyze this more for more precise and concise explanation. So in 2020, so the remittance in the world's total remittance stood at 7.2 billion. In India, in China in 2020, it stood at 60 billion. In Egypt, it stood at 24 billion. While in Philippines, it stood at 33.19 billion. So during the period under review, remittance to Nigeria were relatively stable compared to the number of diasporas from China and India. Of course, there is a bit decline in between 2019 and 2020 because of the COVID-19, and in fact, it affects even the total, the world's total remittance from 714 billion to 702 billion. Then we also use the cluster column charts showing the personal remittance received in the percentage of their GDP in 2014 to 2019. So in that regard, Philippines and Egypt are the highest recipients when you compare it to their total GDP. China is less, but the personal recipient in China was very, very huge. But when it comes to the huge GDP they have, then it is less. Then the selected countries in Africa, we use the graph again to analyze it again. So we use the histogram chart. And on the histogram chart, we can see that Nigeria received about 17.2 billion, followed by the Ethiopia that received about 3.7 billion, China, Ghana, Kenya respectively. And the list, as we see it from the table, is Mali. So in the conclusion, the diaspora remittance is very paramount to Nigerian development. And that is why the federal government put in an unhindered remittance in a way that it will be easier for the diasporas to remit money back to the country. The CBN decided to put up this policy because of the crash on the cruise and as well as this pandemic. So the only way they can cushion the effect is for them to even give a rebate of 5 naira to each of $1 remitted back home. Then Nigerian remittance in 2000 stood at 17.2 billion out of the total amount of the 44 billion sent to sub-Saharan Africa countries. And in 2020, 33.3 billion was remitted to Egypt, to the 8 selected sub-Saharan African countries. The remittance can also improve the well-being of the family members left behind and boost the economies of the receiving countries. Then it also has a negative effect. The negative effect of this remittance is that it discourages those within the labor age bracket to participate in seeking for job and all that there. And even this money being sent to them are not even put in good use. Some of them use it to buy luxurious things. That's why it made them to a kind of buy luxurious cars, chains, and all that there, which actually does not contribute much to the development of the country. So thank you very much. This is my presentation, and I am actually open to any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Please, questions. Who would like to ask questions? Do you have any questions? I just want to ask you concerning very interesting presentation concerning how can you explain why Nigeria receives such big amount of remittances, and from what countries Nigeria receives these remittances? Can you mention?
Yes, the countries, Nigeria, this total amount was being used for the entire globe. But Nigeria actually, it was not anchored to a particular country where this money came from. It came from all over the world. And Nigeria received such huge amount of money in the sub-Saharan African country. Of course, Egypt is in Africa, but it's not included in the sub-Saharan African. So in the sub-Saharan African countries like South Africa, Mali, and some selected African countries, the North Africans were not part of the sub-Saharan. So because of the huge number of the population of Nigeria, as I stated, which is over 200 million. So the number of the Nigerians in diasporas are very, very high. And so that is why they receive such huge amount of money as a remittance, year in, year out. And again, another point there is that the federal government has made it possible for them to even remit more of this, because each of these $1 you remitted back home, the federal government is giving you 5 naira, which is the currency of Nigeria.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Please, any questions? If nobody has questions, we'll continue, and the next presentation will be my presentation. It will be employment reduction as a factor of consumer debt growth in the COVID-19 pandemic. And I would like, just could you close your presentation?
Yes.
Please.
Excuse me.
At the top of your screen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's off, right? Is it off?
Yeah, could you see?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so I would like to present the topic, which the title of which is Employment Reduction as a Factor of Consumer Debt Growth in the COVID-19 Pandemic. The main questions, the paper aims to analyze how the employment decline affects on the growth of consumer debt in the COVID-19 pandemic, evaluate various approaches for employment effect on the consumer debt. The checked hypothesis is employment rate affects the growth of consumer debt in the COVID-19 pandemic. Basic approaches. The problem of...
Sorry. We cannot see your presentation, or I cannot.
You cannot see. No. I'm sorry, can you open my presentation, Mr.
Okay.
Mehmet?
Okay, you shared right now, please close your, okay, you shared, all right.
Is it okay?
Okay,
Now-
okay, everything is okay. Everything's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Basic approach. The problem of over-indebtedness is closely linked to wealth inequality. The poor borrow money from the rich to come closer to their standard of living. A poor person's debt is rich person's asset. It is approach of mine and Sufi. The study of Dingel and Nyman shows that 38% of high-income economists and only 13% for low-income countries can work from home. Assuming there is a linear relationship between the share of people who can work from home and the country's GDP, shows that, for example, in Ukraine, this share is calculated about 20%. In the wake of the global economic crisis, the household crisis led to worsening economic conditions and put pressure on government finances, which caused further income shocks in the form of austerity measures such as social welfare cuts and higher taxes. It is approach of Hilamo. And here I just give some indicators of International Monetary Fund and World Economic Outlook database concerning Ukraine, which shows that the basic indices were declining in the situation of pandemic. And here, the next slide, you can see Ukraine GDP that during the pandemic, it is dropped. And for example, in July 2020, it was a very significant drop, about 11%. And now it is about 1.5% growth. But I mean, it is very drastic results of COVID-19 for Ukrainian economy. And the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic on employment in Ukraine shows that labor market in the period of 2020-2021 led to the following changes: to the actual reduction of employment in Ukraine, to the growth of the unemployed in Ukraine. For example, the rate of unemployed is approximately 9%. To the reduction of the number of Ukrainians working abroad, labor migrants, to the decrease of the income of the population from the sale of its labor force through the decline of salaries, loss of jobs, income of individual entrepreneurs. And here you could see that the employment rate as well decreased, comparing 29 July and January 21. It decreased about 5%. And Ukraine unemployment rate, as I told you, now it is about 9%, but it was 10%. So Ukrainian unemployment rate in 1920 was about 9%. The rise in unemployment so far has not been as sharp in Ukraine as in many OECD countries. And just to mention that unemployment rate between women and men is different. For example, for men, that since the beginning of the pandemic, men have been hit harder and unemployment rates have increased more sharply than for women. And women in employment represent 44% of the total population. In low domestic savings and limited fiscal space further constrain the ability of households or the public authorities to absorb exogenous shocks. And here you could see the average monthly wages. It decreased, and the data of Ukrainian minimum wage, it is according to Ukrainian currency, grivna 6,000 grivna per month. It is about $200. of debt advice services for European households. The study sampled 100 respondents in various spheres of activity in June 2020 in Kharkov. Ukraine were interviewed in the questionnaires of the quality of debt advice services for European households. The sample included the following groups of respondents: employees, 70, private companies, 25, and public authorities. The results are only indicative of the surveyed population characteristics. And here you see some data of this survey. For example, the questions: are you satisfied in the quality of institutions of debt advice for over-indebted households in the country? Are you satisfied with quality debt advisory services in the country? Are there any barriers with quality debt advisory services in the country? How do you assess the quality of debt repayment of the debt advisory services? And how do you define the debt on loans to the population in the country? The question about the possibility of self-repayment of debt demonstrates the ambiguous answer of in the different groups of respondents. For example, 30% of employees and 70% of private companies and 80% of public authorities gave positive answer on the question about the possibility of self-repayment debt. This result highlights the significant over-indebted household in Ukraine. Approximately 55,000 households are over-indebted. The number of employees who have not been paid wages as May the 1st, 2021 is equal to 2.1% regular employees in the region, and in some of areas in average for one employee is about 23,000 Ukrainian hryvnia. And the current state of household debt advice services in Ukraine: 90% of the respondents define the low level of development of the provision of debt advice for over-indebted households in Ukraine. 77% of the respondents consider that the best practice example with regards to the provision of debt advice for household European Union member states in the forms government funding, contributions from creditors could be applied in Ukraine. The result of estimation demonstrates the low development of debt advice for over-indebted households in Ukraine. The majority of respondents stress that they are not satisfied with the quality of debt advisory services in the country. Existing barriers with quality debt advisory service needed to be improved for households. And for example, such data that since the beginning of the pandemic, percent of families, at least one family member has lost her or his job. More than 2 million Ukrainians are registered in the register of debtors. During 2020, there are a number of debtors